Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I am co-founder Lori Bloom. Explore a platform of tips, trends, news, and informative discussions for you and your loved ones. Whether you're 50 and over or way over, find us on gracefullygraying.com, YouTube, and social media. Enjoy this live stream discussion.
Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I'm attorney and co-founder Henry Gornbein. Today on Gracefully Graying, we will be discussing the important topic regarding the impact of asbestos products upon those of us who are gracefully graying or have aging parents, with my guest, Michael Serling of Serling and Abramson, leading experts in the area of asbestos and mesothelioma litigation. Michael, welcome to Gracefully Graying.
Thank you, Henry. It's good to be here today. And pardon my ceiling tiles in the background, but that's going to be used to explain some of the risks and dangers of asbestos products.
Absolutely. First of all, tell our viewers a little bit about who you are and your background, as well as that of the firm, which is, preeminent in this area.
Yes. Well, my firm started, I've been a lawyer 53 years now, and I started my firm, Michael B. Serling PC, originally about 50 years ago, and got into the area of asbestos litigation by just pure chance. I was a general practitioner, and a woman came to me whose husband died at 52 of mesothelioma. And I tried to refer the case to my senior members of the bar, and nobody knew anything about it. So I took the time to learn about it and to search around the country. And I found out that there were cases. There were none in Michigan at the time. And I filed the first case in Michigan and was able to get compensation for this woman who was working for $3 or $4 an hour trying to raise two teenagers. And after that, I just received a flood of cases. And Eric Abramson, who came to me about 33 years ago, actually bought the firm 2 years ago. And so now it's his turn to be my boss. I was his boss for 30 years.
Turn of events. Michael, asbestos has been taken out of products for 20 or 30 years. Why is it still a risk? And first of all, let's start. What is asbestos? I know it's fireproofing, but
it's a mineral found in the ground. Most of the mines are in Quebec, Canada, although there's some in New England, and there may be some out west. And for 100 years, it was determined to be the most resilient fireproofing ever found until in the 20s and 30s, they started to find that it caused terrible lung diseases, fatal lung diseases like mesothelioma and lung cancer, and scarring of the lung called asbestosis, which is a non-cancerous condition, but it can become quite debilitating.
Why is asbestos still a risk to us if it's been, taken out of products for 20 or 30 years?
Well, the reason for that is simply that it is still contained in buildings where it was put in many years ago. Many of our buildings are 30, 40 years old. My building here is nice, looks like a modern structure, but it was built in 1975. So it's coming up on 50 years. So our schools, our hospitals, our factories, our libraries, many of our buildings still have the products right in the buildings. And when maintenance people go in, or tradesmen, they want to refurbish, they're going to come into contact with asbestos. So even though it's been taken out of new products, it's in older products. It's in automobiles, in the cars that used to have brake drums, where they would blow it out of the brake drums, and it would become airborne, and people would breathe it, and over time they could develop lung cancer, mesothelioma.
First of all, why don't you tell us about the dangers of asbestos floor tiles?
Well, floor tiles were put in many homes. I know that in this area, we've had many cases of homes in Huntington Woods and in Northwest Detroit and Oak Park. Homes that were built like in the 50s, 40s and 50s and 60s. And in schools also, floor tiles would be used, and over time they can degrade. And if they're flaking or emitting asbestos fibers, they can become a danger. And worst case is when a do-it-yourselfer, many of us seniors want to be doing our own work. We're on more limited budgets when we get to this age, and we say, well, I'm still pretty strong. I can go down there with my son or my son-in-law and tear up the floor tiles and get rid of them. And that's the worst thing you can do because it would spread the fibers all throughout the house. And if you look at the ceiling tiles behind me, that's another issue because many of our computer cables are strung above the ceiling tiles and below the steel in buildings and that contain fireproofing. And I can explain that when we get to that portion.
So home repairs can be an issue for seniors. What about the risk of developing lung cancer or mesothelioma in old age?
Well, there's kind of a double-edged sword there because many of our seniors may have worked in trades where during their occupation years, while they were working like plumbers, pipe fitters, bricklayers, tile setters, sheet metal workers, carpenters, painters, they were heavily exposed to asbestos. But because it can take 20, 30, 40 years to develop, the disease doesn't happen right away. It takes many years. So when they finally retire in their golden age, all of a sudden they go to the doctor and they're complaining about some symptom or something shows up on an x-ray, and lo and behold, they wind up with lung cancer or mesothelioma years and years later after they retired from their occupation. We get cases in the many in the 60s, but many also in the 70s and 80s and even 90s. People,
Michael, what are the at-risk trades that our viewers should be aware of?
Well, the pipe trades are a significant risk. Plumbers, pipe fitters, boiler makers, the insulators that insulated the pipes were the first trade where we recognized disease being very prevalent. But also keep in mind that people that were other trades that were involved in construction, they also are exposed through the fallout from those that are doing the work. So anybody that's on the construction site, even though they may not be working with asbestos, can be at risk. Many other trades also, sheet metal workers, carpenters, painters. Paint often had asbestos in the paint. Plasters, wallboard, those products, gypsum products at one time all had asbestos in them. There were 3,000 uses of asbestos in industry.
Is asbestos used at all anywhere?
I'm sorry, Henry?
Is asbestos used at all anywhere now?
Brake lining.
It still is.
Used in brake lining, yes. They haven't figured out a way to use a substitute product.
So that's still a danger if you're working on brake linings.
Well, first of all, brake drums were the worst part because as brakes wore out, the lining would fall into the drum and accumulate over 5, 6, 7, whatever number of years there was till you got a new brake job, and you take it into the gas station and the guy would blow it out with an air hose, and this would go on day after day to the mechanic. And today they have disc brakes where the asbestos fibers are not captured in a drum in an encapsulated area. It's a little different.
I'm thinking of the Dream Cruise and all these classic cars. I'm sure a lot of them have brake drums and don't have disc brakes.
Well, they feel, the EPA feels it's not a risk if it's dropping to the outside, and the percentage of it and the microscopic is not considered a risk outside. But the brake drums are still a problem. If you have it's true, if you have these old cars that had brake drums, now they vacuum it instead of blowing it out, and they wear protective garments. So it's everybody's aware of it now.
Michael, if someone is diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, what legal remedies are there?
Well, certainly lawsuits are prevalent all over the country, and in Michigan, we have a specialized judge in Wayne Circuit, and some of the other counties also have specialized asbestos judges, where all the asbestos cases that are filed go to that judge. So in Wayne County, Judge Fassard, who's been on the bench quite a number of years, she was a former prosecutor, Patricia Fassard, she handles all the asbestos cases filed in Wayne County. And the docket is running 2 years max. Cases from filing to trial setting is 2 years. In addition to the court proceedings, many companies decided to try and dodge having to face these cases in courts. So they filed for bankruptcy, even though they had a lot of assets. So many trusts were set up, probably 40, 50 companies filed for Chapter 11, even though they had assets. And so the federal courts around the country set up a procedure where those companies would still have to pay claims out of their profits, but they could not be sued. So they received a bullet, but the trust still pays. So it's a second track that leads to compensation in addition to the circuit court setting.
Michael, how can your firm, Serling and Abramson, be of service in this area?
Well, for the reason that I stated, that building that asbestos is still contained in older buildings and in homes, we do get a lot of calls, people that are concerned about it, and of course we tell them, you should make sure and check the product. We give them the numbers of environmental services that will come in and test. It's not very expensive. They can test the product and determine whether it has asbestos or not. And then if it has to be removed, there's many companies that will come in, put on the hazmat outfits and make sure plastic off the area, and that's a more expensive proposition. But in a home, for example, it's probably under $5,000 for the whole thing to get the tile out of the basements. Usually they're in the basements, or to cover over them. If the material is in pretty good shape, they often put a flooring over it that doesn't contain asbestos. But nobody should attempt to do that on their own, to save money, because it could lead to hazards, especially, young children or children of the seniors could be at risk for many years to come. So, and then those that worked in a dangerous area in an occupation where they were exposed should be monitored by their doctors. And with regular x-rays, there's x-rays now or CTs for early detection of lung cancer, which is the best way to fend off or to keep from the disease becoming fatal, is by early detection and surgery, if it's operable. Mesothelioma, unfortunately, is an incurable disease, and usually the victim passes away within 9 months to 2 years.
Michael, there's a new area of law covering burn pit injuries for those who are in the armed services or working with them. Is your firm becoming involved in that area?
Well, we're becoming involved in the section of that act that covers Camp Lejeune, and you're probably seeing these ads on TV a lot now.
Yes, a lot.
Camp Lejeune is not from burn pits. It's from a tainted toxic water supply from the 50s until the 80s. And there's a myriad number of diseases like leukemia, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, certain cancers, maybe 10 diseases or 15 that are claims that can be compensated by the federal government. A fund was set up, and you have to qualify for the exposure period, and you have to qualify for the disease type. So the Camp Lejeune cases are new and just beginning, but they're covered under the burn pit law that was set up by Congress. Camp Lejeune is and was a Marine base on the Atlantic coast in North Carolina, and the water was tainted for decades. And so many of these diseases are now being compensated by the government. Pretty sad story.
This is an area you're moving into, obviously.
Yes, we're involved in that now. It's just beginning, but we are involved in that.
Let's say someone wants to retain your services, whether it's regarding mesothelioma, the Camp Lejeune, or other types of injuries or diseases. What are the steps that a person takes?
Well, we have a pretty thorough website under serlinglawpc.com. And there's a lot of information on that. They call our local telephone number, which is 248, it's on the screen here, I think, 248-647-6966. We have an 800 number, and all of that's contained on the website. And we have an office in Birmingham, Michigan, and also in Allen Park, Michigan. So we service a good part of the metropolitan Detroit area from those two offices, and often a lot of it is done online or by telephone. And we still get a steady stream of victims of mesothelioma and lung cancer related to asbestos exposure. It's very sad. We also represented school districts and gained a great deal of compensation, over $100 million, for schools so that they could take a lot of the asbestos-containing products out of the schools to protect students, teachers, and custodians. Especially custodians were at high risk because they're constantly in the mechanical rooms and doing work around the schools.
Now, for our viewers' edification, Michael, this is all contingency work, which means they don't pay you a retainer. They're just paid out of the proceeds of whatever result or settlement is achieved, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And generally, it's a 1/3 fee. And if we don't collect anything, then there's no fee. However, when we review a case, we generally know going in whether we have a good chance of success for victims. There's many viable defendants today in the for those that were exposed occupationally, and also many viable bankruptcy claims where a good deal of compensation can be achieved for victims.
Now, there's a special docket that you talked about in various counties. You're on the plaintiff's side. What are the defenses that the companies raise, just for our viewers?
Yeah, of course. Well, typically a defendant will claim that their product was not at a certain location. And of course, we have a tremendous database, and we still have clients that are alive or that have given depositions where we have proof positive of where the products were at. So we often get that as a defense. Or they might say, well, our product was there a limited amount of time, but the guy next to me, the defendant sitting next to me, his product was in abundance there, so they should be more liable than we are. Our cases are unusual because we often have 40, 50 defendants in a case. A workman, a building tradesman might work 30, 40 years, so they were exposed to a lot of different products in their career. So we have an abundance of defendants, and so sometimes the defendants point fingers at each other and say, well, it was really that other guy's product, not my product, not my client's product. And then we also, on mesothelioma, it's hard to defend on the disease aspects. That's pretty much a slam dunk medically. But lung cancer, if the plaintiff smoked, they may try and blame the disease on the client smoking. In point of fact, if the client also had asbestos exposure, even though they smoked, they're still eligible for compensation.
Michael, how long does a typical case take from the time that you're retained until a result is rendered?
Well, Henry, I would say that 2 years to the outside, in other words, sometimes even before 2 years, most cases come up a year and a half to 2 years. And most cases are settled because there's so many defendants. Usually the case can be settled. Occasionally we do have to go to battle. We just tried a case in Wayne Circuit on talc products. We haven't mentioned those yet, but talcum powder, baby powder, contained asbestos for decades.
Wow. And
Johnson & Johnson actually took their product off the market because there were so many cases. I think maybe 500 cases around the country that were filed because of the use of talcum powder. So that's another area. There's so many products that contain asbestos.
What was the result in your trial?
Well, we went to trial for about a week, and we settled. Before we went to trial, we had settled with 7 or 8 talcum powder producers, and the one that didn't want to settle, after a week's trial, they threw in the towel and paid the plaintiff.
Now, one thing you said with regard to the time frame, if someone has mesothelioma, and you said 9 months is like the lifespan after they're diagnosed, it sounds in many of these cases you're really representing the estate or the heirs.
That is correct. Of course, if we get the case in while the plaintiff is living, we try and do a video deposition. Oftentimes we get it in, but if we can't, then we get as much information out of the plaintiff that we can. We find out who their coworkers were, where they worked, and we can still prove the case from coworkers, from company records, from prior depositions. And also you should note, Henry, that the statute of limitations in a death case is very liberal in Michigan. So if somebody in a mesothelioma case, if they live 3 years, then the statute would run out if they didn't file. However, most of them don't live 3 years. So when they pass away, let's say they pass away in 2 years, they get an additional 3 years of allowable statute of limitations. So they can have up to 5, even 6 years to file the claims or their heirs.
It's important information. Are there other issues that we should be aware of, especially those of us who are gracefully graying and not so young anymore or have aging parents?
Yes, another, there's the third disease that we don't talk about much anymore is asbestosis, because many of those victims live the full span of their life. In some cases, they can become very debilitating, and not just shortness of breath, but even having to be confined to a wheelchair. But in most cases, it means that it slows your golf game down. You can't run anymore. You have some noticeable episodes of shortness of breath, but it's not like cancer. So if somebody files for compensation for asbestosis, and then 10 years later, still alive and develops lung cancer or mesothelioma, they have a second bite at the apple. So they can come back and file for a second disease, even though they might have gotten compensation for their asbestosis non-cancer claim years ago. That's a very important thing. And in terms of exposure, I think people have to be very mindful. Do not become a do-it-yourselfer by drilling into walls, cutting out walls, because many of those older homes still have asbestos-containing products inside the wallboard, inside the plaster, in the floor tiles, even in some piping that could be in the basement. And if you're still working as a senior, as a custodian, or in one of the trades, take protection, wear a mask, don't cut into old products without investigating and making sure that you're not digging into asbestos exposure.
Wow, it's frightening. Don't be a do-it-yourselfer, I guess. Michael, are there any final thoughts you would like to share with our viewers before?
Yeah, because we're showing the ceiling tiles up there.
Right.
I think you can see that this is very typical in my office, is these little panels come out, and a lot of people just kind of go up there to look and to string cable above the ceiling tile. They think it's really neat. Nobody sees the cable, but be careful, because and do not try it yourself, because in many buildings that had fireproofing between 1955 and let's say 1975, the fireproofing on the steel, you used to drive by a site that's being built and it would have white stuff all over the steel. That was all asbestos. And over time it can degrade, and where does it fall? On the back of your ceiling tile. So if I were to go up there and push one of those up and it shows some white dust coming off, very likely that could be asbestos. So when you're up there and you look at it as white dust, you say, well, it's clean, right? It ain't clean, and you got to be very careful. So just be mindful of the fact that you could be digging into a dangerous situation. Hire somebody.
Yes, Michael Serling Abramson, thank you so much for being our guest on Gracefully Graying. This is such an important topic. We appreciate your sharing it with us. I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying. And of course, I want to thank our sponsors for making this video and so many others available to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you.